as everyone knows, it seems this war in the Middle East is blowing up. And it seems that even though the United States has yet to declare war on Iran, it will probably happen in the next couple of days with the United States bombing Iran. Today I'm going to share with you my impressions, my analysis of what's happening in the Middle East, and I hope that this discussion will be clarifying, right, and illuminating for many of you. So it's very clear what the U.S. intention is, because we've seen what the United States has done to Iraq, Libya, and Syria. They call it regime change, but it's really the destruction of the society, the destruction of the capacity as a people to be a nation, to work collectively. And the most glaring example, of course, is Iraq. In 2003, before the Americans invaded, it was a fairly well-functioning society. Yeah, I mean, there were sanctions that impoverished the people, but overall, I mean, it was a fairly stable society in the Middle East. The United States goes in, overthrows Saddam Hussein, and at that time, you had a lot of people who welcomed this transition and this change, and they believed that the Americans will implement democracy, which was their stated mission, and it will lead to a more prosperous Iraq. But very soon afterwards, the Americans implement a policy called de-Baathification, which is to remove anyone from the Ba'athist party from government, from the military, from the police. And the problem with this is these are the elite of society. And you remove the elite from society, from the pillars of power, then society ceases to function properly. And that's exactly what happened. It led to massive sectarian violence that continues even today in Iraq. So I can't believe that anyone's as stupid to not know the consequences of this policy of de-Baathification. And so when the Americans say regime change in the Middle East, think of Iraq 2003 and what happened afterwards. So the question now is, how will the Americans move forward? Well, the American strategy in the Middle East, it's been in place for the past 20 years. And regime change requires three pillars, okay? The first pillar is decapitation of the leadership. Just remove the entire leadership, okay? Second is revolutionary intent. And you do that through economic sabotage, right? Through sanctions, by destroying the infrastructure that allows people to live normal lives, which includes water supply and electricity. And the third pillar of the strategy is to foment sectarian violence, to divide and conquer the people, to take advantage of the fact that within these societies there are these minorities of people who have traditionally been suppressed. You give them a promise of a better life. So in Iraq 2003, you had the Kurds, but you also had the Shiites. Iran, there are tons and tons of minorities who are discontent with the way things are right now. So that's the American strategy moving forward. And if we want to clarify or simplify the strategy, we can use a metaphor, okay? Americans, to win wars in the Middle East, they use bombs, they use propaganda, and they use money, okay? Bombs is basically, you have these fighter jets going in to destroy any military opposition. Propaganda is CNN, BBC, New York Times, to create the impression that this is being done in the name of democracy and prosperity and peace. And then money, in that you are financing a lot of the opposition groups. You're financing a lot of the internal dissent, which will overthrow the regime. So this strategy, bombs, propaganda, money. It's also being implemented right now in Iran. And in fact, you could make the argument that this has been going on secretly underground for many years now. Personally, I think the strategy won't work. First of all, bombs don't really work with the geography of Iran. Remember, Iran, it is a mountainous terrain. So it's a huge country. It's 3 times the size of Iraq. So I'm not convinced that airstrikes will do any real lasting damage to the infrastructure of Iran. Propaganda, New York Times, CNN, BBC have absolutely no credibility today, not even among Western domestic audiences. They'll have even less credibility in Iran. And then you have money. And I don't know how effective money will be, because at the end of the day, what differentiates Iran from, say, Libya, Syria, and Iraq is the people in Iran consider themselves Persians. In other words, they consider themselves heirs to a brilliant, creative civilization that's been around for 5,000 years. And I can't overstate enough how that would energize and motivate the people to resist and to unite together. Also, what's really important is the Iranians saw exactly what happened to the Iraqis. This once vibrant, harmonious, brilliant nation was destroyed by American sanctions and American airstrikes. So I don't think that the Americans have a compelling case to make before the Iranian people. So another way of saying this is that even though it seems the Americans have the military advantage, they are still the greatest military in human history. The problem, though, is the Iranians have much more strategic flexibility. And what I mean by that is the Americans, to overthrow this regime, need to decapitate the leadership. They need to create internal dissent, a revolution, and they need to rally the religious minorities against the regime in Tehran. Okay? And that's really the main strategy moving forward, and really the only, oh, this is my son Chris, by the way, and that's the only real path to victory for the Americans. Whereas the Iranians have much more strategic flexibility, okay? So, in other words, America and its allies in the Middle East have major strategic vulnerabilities. For example, let's take Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia has 2 vulnerable resources that the Iranians at any time can strike at through their proxies, the Houthis, right? You have the desalination plants, which is the only source of fresh water for Saudi Arabia. If you knock out the desalination plants in Saudi Arabia loses all its fresh water in 2 weeks' time, and there's no way of replenishing that fresh water. Then, of course, you have the oil fields, which are extremely vulnerable to rocket attacks. So, Saudi Arabia, the main U.S. ally of Arab nations in the Middle East, it's extremely vulnerable to Iranian attacks. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz, which controls a great deal of the world's trade. If Iran closes that off, then that cuts off not just oil to East Asia, but it cuts off revenue for American allies like Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar. And the last strategic vulnerability is you have all sorts of American bases throughout the Middle East, especially in Kuwait, especially in Saudi Arabia, Qatar. And these are legitimate military targets if America declares war on Iran. So another way of saying this is Americans, their ability to inflict pain on Iran, we know it's predictable, And we know that the Iranians can sustain it because this sanctions regime has been going on for the past few decades. But the Iranians' ability to inflict pain on American allies, as well as the American military, as well as American consumers, well, they're not really predictable. And ultimately, you can make the argument that because America is not, the American people are not in favor of this war, then it's less likely that American consumers will be able to sustain, absorb high oil prices and inflation that this war would inevitably cause. So I would say the main advantage going into this war, just from a geopolitical analytical perspective, I would say it's very much in favor of the Iranians. This does not mean that the Americans and Israelis will not be able to inflict tremendous damage on a nation. I mean, if America and Israel continues its bombing campaign, which I suspect it will for the next few months, then we will see tremendous damage and economic loss within Iran. But ultimately, war is not decided by resources, weapons, or technology. It's really decided by a people's willingness to fight and die for what they believe in. And I think when it comes to this question, then I think the Iranians have a huge advantage over the Americans. Also, let's not forget that the Iranians have been studying, the Americans have been studying the American strategy in the Middle East for the past 20 years. And I'm pretty sure they developed counter strategies against an American attack. And I think the main counter strategy is the idea of decentralization. You've got these different militias, different cells embedded in different parts of Iran. So even though America and Israel, they may be able to decapitate the leadership, they may be able to knock out the central leadership in Tehran, they won't be able to occupy the country. And unless they're able to occupy the country and install a military regime that's to their liking, then this war is not won. Then Iran is still a functioning threat to American Middle East interests.